Welcome to the Deep Dive, Congress in Context Edition. We're digging into a really packed congressional week this time, October 7th through the 9th, 2025. And it was, well, a bit of a split personality week, legislatively speaking.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You had this government shutdown crisis just getting worse and worse. But then, kind of surprisingly, you also saw this big bipartisan agreement on national defense.
And the backdrop is crucial here. The House, mostly quiet.
Hmm.
They were largely in recess, just brief pro forma sessions, right?
Exactly. Which drew some criticism, being out for 19 days during a shutdown. But the Senate, they were working nonstop. So our focus, our mission today is really unpacking three big storylines from the Congressional Record for that week.
Okay, what are they?
First, that shutdown mess and how it's tangled up now with a healthcare deadline. Second, the flip side, the successful passage of the huge defense bill, the NDAA. And third, these really intense debates bubbling up about executive power and how government resources are being used or maybe misused.
And that shutdown isn't theoretical anymore. We're talking about real consequences hitting, well, right now. Federal workers are on the line.
That's the hard deadline hitting home. It was stated very clearly on the Senate floor. Federal employees think service members, Border Patrol, air traffic controllers, they're working, but the pay isn't guaranteed. The warnings were explicit. Paychecks could start being missed as early as today, October 10th, or definitely by the 18th if this lapse drags on.
And it's not just paychecks, right? Services are impacted too.
Absolutely. We heard about the National Flood Insurance Program lapsing again, telehealth programs, which are vital, especially for rural communities. They've expired. And the WIC program, that's Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Assistance reports say it's running critically low on funds.
So, okay, let's dig into the legislative mechanics of the shutdown. The Senate was in session Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What happened with trying to fund the government?
Multiple attempts were made to pass what's called a continuing resolution, or CR, basically a short-term funding patch, but they failed. Specifically, the key votes were on cloture. That's the vote to end debate and move to final passage. You need 60 votes for that.
And they didn't get there.
No. We saw votes like 47-52 on one motion, 54-45 on another, short by several votes each time, just stuck.
So what's making this shutdown particularly difficult? You mentioned healthcare.
Right. This is where it gets really complicated. The shutdown fight has sort of merged with this other looming deadline concerning the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, specifically the tax credits that help people afford insurance. They're set to expire at the end of the year.
And insurance companies set their rates way in advance, so even though the expiration date is months away.
Exactly. The market forces a decision now. Insurers are finalizing their 2026 plans and rates right now. If Congress doesn't act literally in the next few days to extend those credits, those companies have to assume the credits won't be there. And the projected impact is huge. Nearly 22 million Americans could see their premiums, on average, more than double.
Double? Wow. Were there specific examples given?
Oh, yeah. Staggering ones. Senators brought up constituent impacts. Like in Virginia, premiums potentially jumping from under $650 a month to almost $2,200 a month. Or a hypothetical 60-year-old couple making $85,000 a year. They might suddenly face over $22,000 annually just for coverage. It's the kind of jump that prices people out completely.
Polls cited suggested 7 in 10 currently subsidized families would lose coverage.
That sounds like enormous political pressure building. It is. And this is where it got really interesting. One senator actually quoted Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene on the floor. Now, she's known for being a staunch critic of the ACA, but she apparently warned colleagues that her own adult children are facing premiums that will double E next year. And she apparently said Republicans need to fix the ACA tax credits.
That's unexpected, quoting Marjorie Taylor Greene in support of fixing ACA credits.
It definitely turned heads. It shows this isn't just some abstract policy debate anymore. It's hitting home across the political spectrum. But the finger pointing is still intense. Democrats are essentially saying the GOP is manufacturing this crisis. They argue Republicans refuse to negotiate because they're prioritizing massive tax cuts. The figure used was $1 trillion for the top 1% over keeping health care affordable for regular families.
And the Republican counter-argument.
They say Democrats are playing a dangerous game. They argue the House already passed a clean, short-term, nonpartisan funding bill, and they claim Democrats are blocking that clean bill to try and force through what they call far left-wing concessions. The example often cited relates to healthcare provisions for non-citizens. So yeah, deep ideological clash with millions of people's healthcare costs caught in the middle.
Okay, so that's the gridlock side. Let's pivot to where things actually did move forward. the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA.
Right, quite the contrast. Despite all the shutdown chaos, the Senate managed to pass the NDAA for fiscal year 2026. That's Bill S. 2296. And it authorizes a massive amount, $924.7 billion.
And the vote wasn't even close, was it? 77-20. In this political climate, how does defense spending manage that kind of consensus? Is it just seen as essential, or were there specific things in this bill?
I think it's a mix of both. There's always a strong baseline of support for defense funding as a core government responsibility. But this NDAA also included some significant policy provisions and reforms that likely broadened its appeal.
Like what? What were some key amendments that got adopted?
Well, for military families, there was a notable agreement requiring the Secretary of Defense to finally implement recommendations from the Comptroller General about fixing military housing shortages and affordability issues. That's been a long-standing problem. There was also an amendment from Senators Lee and Duckworth to make it easier for the National Guard to get reimbursed for state active duty missions, like disaster response, streamlining bureaucracy there.
What about technology and emerging threats?
Big focus there, too. Amendments were passed to give the military better tools to counter unauthorized drones near bases and sensitive sites. Importantly, the language required that these detection and mitigation methods include privacy and civil liberties safeguards. And they also mandated an audit of Defense Department cloud computing contracts, looking specifically at risks posed by foreign countries of concern.
You mentioned something about investment security. Title VIII, that sounds potentially really significant.
It really is. This is new territory. Language was added to the Defense Production Act, the DPA, that actually prohibits U.S. companies or individuals from investing in certain sensitive technologies in specific countries of concern. They call them covered national security transactions involving prohibited technology. This is regulating outbound investment, U.S. money flowing out, which is a major policy shift driven by concerns about strategic competition.
So a big step on regulating where U.S. tech investment goes.
Huge. It shows how seriously Congress is taking the tech competition aspect, even amidst all the domestic fighting. On the foreign policy side, it also authorized $350 million over the next few years to help Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania boost their cyber defenses. And it authorized technical help for Ukraine, specifically to identify and recover children abducted during the conflict.
Were there any high-profile amendments that didn't make it?
Yeah, a couple drew debate. The Paul Warren Amendment got a lot of attention. It aimed to stop the Federal Reserve from paying interest on overnight deposits held by big banks. The sponsors framed it as ending a taxpayer subsidy for giant banks. But it failed pretty decisively, 1483.
Interesting. And what about the flag debate?
Yes, the Marshall Amendment. That would have prohibited flying non-U.S. flags on publicly accessible federal buildings. There was debate, and constitutional concerns were raised about restricting expression. That one also didn't pass.
Okay. That banking vote failure kind of leads us back towards the domestic political battles, doesn't it? Away from the defense consensus.
It does, because while there was unity on the NDAA, the divisions over domestic issues and executive power were really stark elsewhere in the debates.
Especially concerning the use of federal agents and the National Guard.
Exactly. There were strong condemnations on the floor about the deployment of National Guard troops and federal agents, including ICE, into U.S. cities. Chicago, Los Angeles, Portland, D.C. were mentioned specifically. The core criticism was that these deployments were happening against the stated wishes of local mayors and governors.
And the language used was pretty strong. Authoritarian.
Very strong. Senators called it an authoritarian power grab, an illegal, immoral use of federal power, essentially trying to intimidate or silence dissent. And they pointed to court actions. In Chicago, a temporary restraining order had apparently blocked a deployment. And in LA, a federal judge had previously ruled that similar past deployments constituted a willful violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. That's the old law restricting military use in civilian law enforcement.
And this tied into oversight hearings as well.
Yes, there was a reference to a Judiciary Committee hearing with Attorney General Bondi. She faced accusations of having systematically weaponized the Justice Department. The claim was she used it to protect the president's allies and target his opponents. She apparently pushed back hard, trying to shift blame onto Democrats for the ongoing shutdown.
Let's shift gears slightly to energy and land management. There was action there, too, related to overturning regulations.
Right. Using the Congressional Review Act, the CRA. This is a specific tool Congress has to quickly undo regulations put in place by a previous administration, basically with a simple majority vote. The focus this week was on efforts to overturn several Bureau of Land Management resource plans from the Biden era, specifically plans affecting Miles City in Montana, areas in North Dakota, and the central Yukon region of Alaska.
And the argument for overturning them.
It boils down to resource access. Republicans argued these plans violated the legal requirement for multiple use of federal lands. They claim the plans effectively lock up vital resources. The example given for Miles City was 338 million tons of coal being made inaccessible. There was also a specific argument made about Alaska Native corporations, like Doyon, being prevented from developing resources on their lands, hindering their economic self-determination.
And the counter-argument from Democrats, what was their take?
They framed it in terms of climate and energy costs. They accused the current administration of worsening an energy crisis by canceling billions in clean energy initiatives. The specific example used was the $7 billion Solar for All program. They linked rising electricity prices, citing a figure of over 10% increase under the current administration, to policies they claim favor energy-intensive industries like cryptocurrency mining, allegedly benefiting big crypto donors.
So a fundamental disagreement about land use, energy policy, and climate.
Absolutely. One side sees vital resources being wrongly restricted, driving up costs. The other sees necessary environmental protection and clean energy investment being undermined for political reasons. Classic resource battle.
Okay, rounding things out, let's touch on some global affairs mentions and commemorations from the week.
Important moments there, too. Senators took time to mark the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. They remembered the more than 1,200 victims and paid tribute to the hostages who were still, at that point, being held captive. Resolutions were introduced condemning Hamas and rising anti-Semitism.
But there was also some positive news on that front.
Yes, actually. The majority leader mentioned what he called very welcome news regarding the first phase of a potential Israel-Gaza peace plan. Apparently brokered by the administration, it was expected to lead to the release of all the remaining hostages. A significant diplomatic development mentioned amidst all the domestic strife.
And the routine business of diplomacy continued as well. Nominations.
It did. Even with everything else going on, the Senate processed several ambassador nominations. Countries like Lebanon, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Namibia, the Philippines. It's that slow, essential work of keeping U.S. diplomatic posts filled, which is crucial for foreign policy continuity, even when Washington feels gridlocked.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this week tell us? What should you, the listener, take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that duality we started with. You saw Congress function remarkably well on a huge, complex piece of legislation like the NDAA, that 77-20 vote. That's significant consensus.
But at the exact same time, you saw intense political warfare paralyze the basic functioning of government funding. And that paralysis is now causing real, escalating harm, missed paychecks, lapsed programs, and this looming healthcare premium crisis.
It shows Congress can act decisively, especially on perceived national security threats, but it also shows it can get completely bogged down in partisan battles that have immediate, painful consequences for everyday Americans. The system can work and it can fail simultaneously.
So for you, the listener, wanting to stay engaged, Congress.gov is your friend here. You can track that defense bill, S-2296, see what happens next. And definitely keep an eye on those upcoming tariff votes mentioned SJREs, 77 and 81. There's a deadline for votes on those by October 31st.
And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. We heard deep concern expressed on the Senate floor from both Republicans and Democrats, sparked by that Representative Green quote about millions potentially seeing their health insurance premiums double. So the question becomes, what are the real costs politically, economically, personally when something as fundamental as the ACA tax credits, something that directly impacts household budgets for 22 million families, becomes just another bargaining chip, collateral damage in these endless budget fights? That's not an abstract question anymore. Those bills are arriving.